So this video starts our chapter on evolution. So here's the vocab words. All right. So vocab from previous chapters. We've got mutation, alleles, crossing over, meiosis. New vocab. We've got biosphere, the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere. A genome, species, habitat, populations, variation, communities, ecosystem, biome, niche, also pronounced niche, adaptations, evolution, speciation, biodiversity. These 21 words are on the quiz, all 21 of them. Quiz is coming up and it is matching per usual. You are expected to go through the vocab words and know them for the quiz. So getting into the notes. So on the origin of the earth and life. So scientists approximate that the age of the earth is about 4.6 billion years old and that the universe is about 13.8 billion years old. The Grand Canyon shows the Earth's history in fossil-containing layers. So if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, it's amazing. Pictures really don't do it justice. If you haven't been, then you need to go at some point in your life. But you could see these little bands, even down here, you could really see a dark band and a light band here. All the different bands represent different periods of time, and scientists have been able to find different fossils in these different layers of rock. So naturally, the older fossils would be found near the bottom layers, and the most recently formed fossils would be found near the top. You should know at this point in your life that a fossil is a remnant of a once living thing and most commonly found in sedimentary rock. So it's an indentation where an organism landed and it got covered in sediment. That sediment hardened. The organism would have died and decayed, but its remains, the hard remains like bone or cytoskeleton or anything like that, would have left an imprint behind in that rock. So here's a chart that shows that in the deepest layer of rock, we have no life detected. And then as we go up in the layers, we can see different fossils start to appear, and mammals being in recent layers and humans in the most recent layers. Okay. So obviously for fossils, moist soil is best for fossils. Swamps were ideal. That's one of the reasons why we see more marine fossils than almost anything else. So we know about Louis Pasteur from earlier chapters, and he was the one who disproved spontaneous generation and proved biogenesis. And it was, though, hypothesized that life began on our planet about 3.5 billion years ago, so about 1 to 2 billion years after the Earth was around in the first place. So scientists, you have that whole chicken or the egg question, and how did life actually come about? And there are some hypotheses on here, but to begin with, we think that the original recipe for Earth's atmosphere contained methane, ammonia, hydrogen gas, and water. And with these gases in our atmosphere, life would not have been able to happen, at least not, human life, that's for sure. But if you look at all of these compounds that were around on Earth in the beginning, they do contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, which we know are needed for carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, which are our macromolecules that are needed to make living things. So it was Alexander Oparin that said that these simple chemical processes and energy produce the first organic compounds associated with organisms. And then over time, there's many videos on like YouTube that you could watch that kind of explain how these different elements and compounds could have come together to produce some of the first life. So unicellular organisms appeared about 3.5 billion years ago. Unicellular organisms then evolved into multicellular organisms. Some of the first multicellular organisms would have been autotrophs, where they are able to take either chemicals or sunlight and make their own food from that. Eventually, then we got heterotrophs of different sorts, and then obviously more complex as evolution went on, who are able to consume other organisms for energy. So there are more than 5 million species of animals that exist on Earth today, and most of them are insects, and it's thought that there's even more than that we just don't really know about. And all of these species that exist on our planet only represent about 1% of all organisms that have ever inhabited the Earth. So that means that a lot of the organisms that once inhabited the Earth are now extinct. So saber-toothed tigers, dodo birds, dinosaurs, they're all gone, and that's only a fraction of them. So that leads us to talking about common ancestry, and we can see here that all of these organisms on this slide are cats. They're all different types of cats, though. So in common ancestry, we can see that there are a lot of similarities between different species of organisms, but there are a lot of differences as well that make them their own individual group of organisms. So if certain groups of organisms look like they could have been evolved from the same common ancestor, it is possible that if we go back far enough, we can see that organisms that maybe don't look completely alike have a common ancestor. And it goes to show that all organisms on the planet have the same 4 bases of DNA. And many of these organisms on Earth have very similar metabolic pathways inside of them, lots of the same chemical reactions that we'll see. So the first scientist that came along and said, I think I know how evolution occurred was Lamarck. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. And he proposed the whole you use it and it forms, and you don't use it and you lose it sort of situation. So he was saying that, for example, giraffes use their necks a lot. They maybe started with shorter necks, then as they stretched and stretched and stretched over time, that their necks grew, and then that was passed on to their offspring. And that is not true. We know that animals, organisms in general, cannot pass on any traits that they acquired throughout their lifetime. If someone gets in a car accident, for example, and loses an arm, and then they have a child, it doesn't mean that child, just because the parent is missing an arm, doesn't mean the child is going to be missing an arm. So anything that someone acquires throughout their lifetime because of their environment is not going to be passed down to their offspring. So scientists wondered, would anyone ever get this right? Many scientists tried to figure out how evolution was occurring, and it wasn't until Darwin came around that we got a valid explanation. So Darwin studied organisms for many years. He took a ship around the world and collected specimens and just studied how organisms really were different and similar. He set out to disprove evolution, but actually ended up doing the opposite. And after his voyage, he worked on his findings for over 20 years and knew that his findings would be controversial to many people, so he didn't publish them. But then he ended up publishing them about 20 years later because another scientist named Alfred Wallace found the same things that Darwin found, and he wrote Darwin a letter saying, this is what I think. I'm basically explained what Darwin was saying about natural selection and evolution. And Darwin was kind of like, oh no, if I don't publish this, someone else is going to get credit. So Darwin published his findings. He did, talk to Alfred Wallace about it, and they wrote something together. But then about a year later, Darwin released his book, which we could see here. It's The Origin of Species. And that was out to the public, and he got the credit for evolution, which even to this day is a controversial topic for some people. But he did most of his work here on the Galapagos Islands off the coast of South America. Many different organisms live on these islands, so there was a lot for them to study. And Darwin was looking at how the earth can change over time. So he figured, the landscape changes so much. You have a flood, you have an earthquake, you have volcanoes erupting. So the earth's surface can change. So why can't organisms change over very long periods of time? So it took a long time. Like I said, even now people, are very hesitant about what Darwin is saying. But I will tell you that even the Catholic Church does support the theory of natural selection, to support evolution. They just don't think it explains how organisms got here in the first place, which it really doesn't. It just explains how we could have all came from a common ancestor. So there are 4 main things that Darwin's theory of natural selection states, and we will get to these on the next video. But they are variations exist in populations. Some variations are favorable for survival. Not all young produced in each generation can survive. And individuals that do survive and reproduce are the ones that have those favorable variations, because nature selects which individuals will survive. So that's basically what Darwin says in his theory of natural selection to explain how evolution happens. We will look at that more in the upcoming video. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you soon.